One, go.
Okay, guys, hi. So here's my attempt at trying to give you some background and help you start Faulkner, even though you're not here. So don't expect me to be funny like I normally am in class because you're not here, to bounce things off. So I'm having to do this with notes and things, okay? So this little lecture for you is called Reading William Faulkner Closely and Repeatedly, Ideally. So in a 1956 interview, Faulkner was asked, some people say they can't understand your writing, even after they read it 2 or 3 times. What approach would you suggest for them? And Faulkner replied, read it 4 times. So yeah, that's really funny, except that is what I'm going to suggest to you, that you have to reread Faulkner in order to get it. As glib as Faulkner's response was, it does give good advice. His work really does reward rereading. It's very disquieting for you to begin a Faulkner novel because at first you have no idea what's going on. You need to have a little faith in your ability to understand it. And as you get through a chapter, a lot of those questions are going to be answered. So it's really good if you can go back to the beginning of the chapter after you've finished the chapter. You have to remember that his work it's a reinforcement of really eternal themes. So, okay, I'm going to give you a little background on Faulkner. I know you're going to do your first blog, and while I'm there, let me make sure I kind of answer questions, even though you're not here to ask me. So, yes, you're going to need to set up a blog on Blogger. And that first assignment, if you look at my blog that's in Canvas, it tells you exactly what you have to do for that first assignment. And it involves, when you look at my blog, start at the bottom. That's how it goes. Anyway, that's how it goes. So the first entry is down at the bottom, and it's taking you to Excitement, a site that kind of sets up and has some background on Faulkner. So you're going to find what you want to write about, what you find interesting, but I want to make sure that you get some of the highlights of his life. So he was born in Mississippi in 1897. So I want you to think about that time period. Sorry, that's my cat's tail. So think about that time period. It was after the Civil War and the South was a shambles. Now Faulkner's family was kind of well-to-do, upper middle class. Both his parents were well educated. His mother was a great reader. But his grandfather was a colonel in the Civil War. So there's a lot of that kind of establishment in his family. He did have a nanny called Mammy Callie, a black nurse tradition in his family. So he was considered old Southern aristocracy. Faulkner was very bright. He skipped kindergarten. He skipped 2nd grade, which was great. He's on a roll, except that then teachers wanted him to study stuff he didn't want to study. And all Faulkner wanted to do was to tell stories, write stories, tell stories. He used to be able to get people to do his chores by giving them a little bit of a story and then not finishing it. So he'd say, oh, well, I'll give you the rest of the story if you do my chores for me. So that's how he got through his young elementary school. But once he got to high school, he stopped really liking to go to school at all. He'd just go so he could play sports. So he never did really graduate. In fact, his classmates would call him the laziest boy they'd ever seen. One of the great stories about that his brother writes about in his brother's book was that Faulkner would invent games. So they didn't have baseball gloves or baseballs even or bats, so they would play with horse chestnuts. If you know what those are, it's what chestnuts have, but it's the outside green part of so it's a big kind of thing, and they would use sticks. So they would throw them and then run the bases and stuff. Well, Faulkner thinks, oh, I think I can up this game just a little bit more. And he said, let's do it on horses. So they would run the bases on horses. Well, that was great until somebody threw the horse chestnut, hit the horse in the rear end, and the horse took off down the field with his youngest brother. So that didn't turn out so well for Faulkner. However, I guess it was fun. He felt always socially inferior, but intellectually superior. His first girlfriend, really interesting, was Estelle Oldham, but her family was upper class in his town, and they didn't want her to marry Faulkner because he wasn't high enough or wealthy enough for them. So she did what her family asked of her and she married somebody else. Years later, she got divorced, brought her 2 daughters back to Oxford, Mississippi, and then married Faulkner. During World War I, Faulkner was not allowed to be in the Air Force because he was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. So he was too short for the United States Air Force. So he went to join the Canadian Royal Air Force, of which was really great. And he got trained, couldn't wait. And then the war ended. So that was upsetting for him because he was really looking forward to all it. So he made stories up about the war when he came back to tell people. So Faulkner's like an impressionist artist. He creates images that convey emotional truth of people and places. So not necessarily you're not looking at the overview or a plot structure. You're looking at an impressionist painting only using words. After he got out of school, he did do odd jobs, but he kept getting fired because he couldn't complete the tasks. His funniest job, I thought, when he was worked for the post office, and he got fired because he'd play bridge in the back and ignore the customers. And then when he was really bored, he'd read the customers' magazines, so he wouldn't wait on people, so he got fired from that one. But eventually, after Estelle moved back and they got married, he realized he had to work to make a living because his writing wasn't paying the bills. So he started working at the night shift, shoveling coal. He bought Roanoke, which was an old rundown kind of estate farm, and he spent years and years remodeling and fixing it back up. When his writing started to kind of take off, he said, "I discovered that my own little postage stamp of native soil was worth writing about, and that I would never live long enough to exhaust it." He started his own town called, you'll see it in print, it's pronounced Yoknapatawpha County. Now, I can pronounce it without looking at it. If I had to look at it, I wouldn't be able to pronounce it. It was kind of based on a river that was close in Mississippi where he grew up. He became convinced that the major Southern issue was not race, but the rise of rednecks who had none of the standards and morality of the aristocrats. His characters were, and this is a quote from him, "created, I say, because they are composed partly from what they were in actual life and partly from what they should have been and were not. Thus I improved on God, who, dramatic though he be, has no sense, no feeling for theater." That kind of quote kind of gives you the idea of Faulkner. But you know, it's hard because you think of him as arrogant. I think he just was socially inappropriate. He did have a drinking problem, but interestingly enough, he had a very controlled drinking problem. He wouldn't drink while he was working, and when he was done with a book, he'd go on binges. So he did have some time in different places that would help him recuperate from those binges, but his drinking was notorious in town. By 1935, however, he had a national reputation. By November 10th, 1950, he received the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, let me tell you, that's a world prize. That's not a national prize. So when I say he's a great writer, realize it's not just me. Lots of people say he's a great writer. When he delivered his speech, no one could actually understand what he was saying. You'll see that in the films that I have queued up for you on Canvas. His speech is really kind of mumbling, and he has this really heavy Southern accent, so he's hard to understand. But once his speech was published, they said after it was printed, it's been called the best speech ever given at a Nobel dinner. So please look, those 2 links. I have one link that is, you just kind of watch it. You can see how short he was, how he talks to people in town. It's kind of rigid. It's not a great documentary, but it's old and you can actually see what he looks like. And then the other one, you can listen to his speech and it's printed for you so you can understand it. So now I'm going to give you some advice to reading the novel. The first thing is to have faith. Okay, it's going to take patience. You will get it, but don't lose sight of the end goal. Okay, it will be worth it. Be willing to reread. I know that's hard because you have a limited amount of time, but this is the most you can do to understand the book. If you come to me and say, "Oh, I don't understand what's going on," I'm going to say to you, "Did you reread it after you finish the chapter?" And you'll say, no, you probably went to, online to some goofy Spark Notes or something. And that's not helping you. Okay, it's not making you a stronger reader. The third thing, focus on the characters. He's a great character writer. And look for timeless tales. As Faulkner said, the past is never dead. It's not even past. And you'll see that because his writing is not linear. It's like lilacs, like wisteria, the way it grows. It goes